Welcome to the Hazard Class Podcast. This is the podcast where I ask my stupid questions to some of the smartest people in and around the world of emergency services. My guest this week is the Global Director for Counter-Narcotic Technology at Rigaku Analytical Devices. He has a distinguished career spanning more than 32 years as a special agent for the Drug Enforcement Administration. He spent his career traveling the world, finding and dismantling narcotic operations. He is a graduate of the U.S. Ranger Training Battalion and holds a master's degree in interdisciplinary technology and management from the University of Eastern Michigan. It's my pleasure to welcome Michael W. Brown. Michael, thank you for joining me.
And thank you for the invitation.
Of course, yeah, it's my pleasure. I'm very excited to chat. So, long story career. I know a little bit about it, but I want to get all the way back to the beginning before we get into what's going on now in the world. So, why does somebody get into this? What was the inspiration to get into law enforcement and drug interdiction, these kind of things?
We got to go back to 1989. Right. I just graduated college, University of Cincinnati, degree in public administration. I was considering law school. And at that time, I was working in retail security at one of the larger department stores in Cincinnati. So, I was very involved in the anti-theft prevention program, working with the Cincinnati police, had an opportunity to testify in court a number of times. And I can remember one Sunday after work, I was at home watching 60 Minutes. And it was Mike Wallace, and he says, we have a special show today. It's going to be 1 hour. It's the DEA in South America. And the next thing I know, I'm looking at DEA agents jumping out of UH-1 helicopters in the jungles of Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia with host country counterparts fighting drug traffickers. There's a section on agents going to Ranger School, doing all the training and then going downrange, as we say, to put boots on the ground and go after narco trafficking. And I looked at my mother and I said, that's what I want to do. My mom looked at me and said, you're crazy. You're going to law school. And that Monday, I went down to the recruiter's office, talked to the agent in charge, filled out my application. And just by luck, 6 weeks later, he called me and says, hey, someone dropped out of a class. We can get you into BA 64, which was Basic Agent Training 64 class. And I packed the bag and I was gone.
Wow. So from department store security to, combating the international drug trade that fast. Was there any history of law enforcement in your family prior to that, or
Not
military?
My father was military. He was U.S. Navy during World War II. He was in the South Pacific Theater. But I had really no idea or desire to join the military at that time. My mom was an academic, a teacher, excuse me, and she was pushing me towards, law school, and that's the way to go. And continue your education. And it sounded good to me until I saw that clip in 60 Minutes. And then
Wow.
it woke something up in me. And I was like, that looks like a great career.
So at this point, try to bring me to that place, right? Was this like a competitive market? When you came up to this recruiter's office, was this a thing like, oh, you're going to be competing with tens of thousands of people or hundreds of people for a job? Or how competitive was the job market at that point?
It was funny. Let me tell you a quick story. So I go down to the recruiter's office after work. So I have on my work uniform, which was like a blue Adidas sweatsuit, because I used that as undercover, walking through the store. My hair was a little longer, had like this little ponytail, and I had an earring in my left ear. And I go to the recruiter's office, and the head of the office, a guy named Herb Warren, special agent in charge of the Cincinnati DEA office. This guy was immaculately dressed, suit, tie, hair was combed, fingers were manicured. And he opens the door and he's like, how can I help you, young man? I said, hey, I want to be a DEA agent. And he gives me the up and down, looks at me and says, I tell you what, come back tomorrow with a suit and a haircut and maybe we can have a conversation. He closes the door. Right? So I go home. I'm like, I got to get a suit. Never wore a suit in my life. Go to the store. I get a suit. I get a haircut, take the earring out, go back down the next day, knock on the door. Mr. Warren comes to the door and says, okay, that's what a federal agent looks like. Now come on and let's have a conversation.
Wow.
We spent about an hour talking about the job. This is what it takes. How are your grades in school? This is what the training's in. This is a great career. But are you material for DEA? We don't just accept anyone. We only take the very best of the best, cream of the crop. But fill your application in, send it in, and let's see what happens. So I filled out the application, sent it in. Mr. Warren called me and says, hey, just by chance someone dropped out of a class, we've got a space. Do you want it? But if you want it, you got to go in 2 weeks. I said, I'm there. So went home, told my mom, hey, I'm going to DEA, going to become a federal agent, packed the bag, and that was it. And never looked back, never second guessed that decision.
What's the lag time between you seeing that 60 Minutes clip and you actually headed off for DEA school?
Well, so I saw that clip on Sunday, went to the recruiters on Monday. I don't remember which month it was, but I would say maybe 6 weeks. It was a very short period of time.
Holy cow.
Short period of time. DEA had a huge hiring push on. They were looking for agents. It was right time, right place. I mean, I have friends now trying to apply for DEA. They've been waiting a year.
Wow.
Right? Background, because things have changed a little bit since 1989. Mm-hmm. A lot more critical of who comes in the background investigation, et cetera. So, right place, right time. I got in. I was ready to go. Herb Warren made a call for me. Says, I got a guy here. I think he's really good. And he needs to be in this next class. And with that, I was on my way to Quantico, Virginia, at the FBI Academy, where I took part in a 3.5-month special agent training course.
So talk to me about that then. You're fresh, virtually no experience, right? You have a bit of security experience, stuff like that from your job, but how do they spin you up into an actual usable DEA agent? Like, what are some of the things that you're learning?
Well, I tell you think you go down in shape. I was in pretty good shape at 24, but that store security experience did not. Well, it gave me the mental preparation, but not the physical preparation, right? DEA training is very paramilitary. First day, you have like black cargo pants, you have a gray shirt, and you're wearing combat boots, and everywhere is like, military time. You got to be early is to be late. So it was very intense academics, very intense physical training, very intense psychological training for 3 months. I mean, you think of like an Army boot camp, someone's in your face constantly. Do you have what it takes, right? Going to classes, your grades can't drop below a B. You have to be able to get along with people. It's kind of like a military officers training course, right? They teach you how to be a leader. They teach you all the ins and outs, the undercover, how to work complex investigations, how to conduct arrests, how to shoot. I've never shot a gun before.
Oh, wow. Right?
Here's a 6-hour 9mm. Here's a shotgun. Here's an SMG, submachine gun. Here's how you do a tactical raid. Here's how you do a pivot in vehicle tracks or vehicle traffic stops. Mm-hmm. The whole gamut. And I was completely exposed to a new world that I never knew existed. So it was quite an experience, both mentally and physically.
So that initial spin up 3 months, what goes on after that? I imagine there's a lot of continuing education. There's probably different pipelines you can go down to learn different specialties and whatnot. Like, how does that program work? Is there a selection process to get into different factions of the DEA?
Well, it's kind of a one agent is a one-man army. They teach you how to do everything, right? They teach you how to do undercover, how to do raids. You have to be able to fit into every classification of what an agent is when you go into the field, right? A lot of agencies say, hey, we'll call a SWAT team to kick the door. No, you're going to be kicking the door. A lot of agencies we need a special chemical team to come collect drug and do the drug analysis. No, you're going to be collecting the drugs. A lot of agencies say undercovers are only for certain individuals. If you want to do undercover, we'll teach you and you're going to do undercover. Mm-hmm. So you really, when you come out of that academy, you are prepared to do anything that comes up. So once you graduate, everybody got their assignments. My assignment was Detroit, Michigan. I looked at someone and said, where's Detroit? Right? I lived in Cincinnati my whole life. Never left it. Had no idea where Detroit, Michigan is. And someone said, oh man, Detroit, lots of drugs, lots of gang bangers. You're going to love it. And I was like, oh, that sounds good. Let's go to Detroit. Mm-hmm. 4 hours away, I go to Detroit, get my first apartment. And, that next day, go into the office, got my blue suit on. I got my Florsheimmer shoes on and go and meet the group supervisor. He's like, hey, welcome to Detroit. Agent Brown, here's your pager. Here's 2 rolls of quarters. When this pager goes off, you got to call me. This is back before cell phones. Right? So we were going over at gas stations, making phone calls, using pagers. It was quite the experience.
So as you roll into that, before we even get to how you what happened when you were in Detroit? How does that assignment process work? Is it some sort of hierarchy of selection, or they decide where you're going, or is it class performance, something like that?
I think it's a combination of class performance, how well you did academically, how well you did physically. I seem to do really well in the undercover scenarios, the more aggressive, search warrants, making arrests. Detroit, very dangerous time at that time. You had a lot of gang activity. You had Crips, Bloods, Latin Kings. You had your corner boy street operations. So it was a very aggressive place to work. And of course, that was the epicenter of crack cocaine back then. So Detroit got a lot of agents to work on that situation. So I think that's kind of why I went to Detroit, to kind of fit into that mold and help those agents in that region or that city really attack that problem.
So you land in Detroit. Talk to me about like your first assignment, your first couple of assignments as you're getting your feet wet, actually doing the job.
No, another great story. First day, as I said, I go into the office, got my brand new blue suit on, white shirt, my Johnson Murphy shoes, just bought them $180, right? A lot of money back. Going to meet the GS, he's like, hey, this is your partner, another senior agent. He's been there for a number of years. And so I go out and meet him. He shows me around the office. Then at 12 o'clock, boss comes in and says, hey, we got a search warrant. We're going to go out and arrest several Crip operators that were selling crack cocaine in one of the areas of the city. So I go with my partner, we go out, we put our vest on, over my suit, right? And we're watching a couple crack dealers, and the group supervisor gives the word, make the arrest. So I jump out of the car. And at that time, I had, everybody saw Miami Vice. I had the shoulder holster, right?
Oh, cool.
So I had the $6 in the shoulder. Sounds cool, but not too cool. So I get out of the car to go after these guys. And the first thing I hear is something hitting the ground, bang. My gun falls out of my holster.
Oh, no.
I'm looking at my partner running down the street by himself. I pick up my gun. Now I'm running down the street. My vest comes undone. And, we tackle these guys. My partner's like, put your gun away, put your gun away. Holster the gun. We get into this big fight with three of these Crip dealers. And we managed to get it under control, get the handcuffs on. My suit was completely destroyed. Shoes were destroyed. So we got these guys sitting on the sidewalk. My boss comes out and says, this is why you don't wear a suit to work. You're a DEA agent. You're not an office guy. You're a field guy. That's appropriately. So after that, I was coming in jeans, T-shirts. You got to wear the right clothes for the right job. So,
that's pretty funny. From you trade yourself back in for your Nike tracksuit again, I guess, right?
And that was back in the clothes, working the street.
Did you also trade in your underarm holster? Did you go to the hip?
Boss says, get rid of that holster. Get yourself a hip holster. This is Miami Vice. You're not modeling. You got to be functional.
Okay. So what else is going on in Detroit at that time? I mean, that's pretty crazy to think about. You're making arrests on your first day on the street. I understand that you also did some undercover work there too. Talk to me about the first time going undercover and kind of what that emotion was like. I would imagine it's pretty tenuous.
Yeah, my first undercover operation, we were targeting a guy who was selling 0.5 kilograms of coke, right? Mm-hmm. Coke. And guy's been around a long time. He's one of those old school drug traffickers, never been arrested, very hard to get. And at that time, I had an informant that I was given, and I was working the informant. And he's like, hey, you got to go after this guy. He's a big heroin dealer and cocaine dealer, and he's got 0.5 kilogram of coke he's trying to sell. I said, well, hey, hook me up. Let him know you got a guy. He's like, no. I'm like, you don't sound like a drug dealer. You don't look like a drug dealer. You sound too polished. You sound white, is what he would say. Oh. He says, no, you got to. I said, look, man, I'm not from the hood. I can't play that role. You tell him you've got a really high educated guy, works out in real estate. He can move that coke where no one can move it. He can move it out into the suburbs. Right. Play me up as a big player. So the informant goes out and meets the source of the drugs. Hey, I got this guy. His name's Mike. He works in real estate. He's out in the suburbs, like the really rich areas. He's got all kinds of customers. So the guy's like, hey, no problem. Let me meet this guy. So the informant comes back, says, hey, he wants to meet you. So it's wintertime. In Detroit, it's very cold. So we roll up in my car, had like an old Mustang. The subject, he's in another car next to me with the informant. I get out, get into the back seat. We have a conversation. He's like, so man, I heard you got some great connections out in the suburbs. You're in real estate. I said, look, yeah, I can move your product where you can't take it, right? I have access to customers you don't have access to. So this is how I can help you out. We can both make some money. He was like, cool. I got half a kilo in the trunk. You got the money? I said, sure. The money's in my car. I'm going to get out, go to the trunk, get it, and I'm going to give it to the informant. He's going to bring it to you, and he's going to bring me half kilo, and then we'll talk later. And the guy was like, cool, let's do this. So I get out of the car. I go back to my car, and I pop the trunk, which was the arrest signal. At that time, agents jump out of the woods, out of cars. They take this guy down, and we take that half kilo. We make the arrest.
Wow. And
later on, the guy's looking at me back at the station, back at the office, says, I knew you were a cop. And I said, you had no idea I was a cop. I'm ready to make that sale. You thought you could make some money. Let's just work together, and let's see if we can work out a deal. And he's like, no, I'll just do my time. So he went to jail. I think he got like 5 or 6 years for half a kilo. Wasn't that much time, but a lot of considerations were given. But that was like my first undercover operation. So from that, you learn more, you go out, you become better at it.
So as you're doing these, like, I've always wondered about the inner monologue that's going on. Obviously, there's the calm, cool on the outside. You're doing this undercover operation. Is a constant stream of inner monologue, like, oh no, am I going to get found out? Oh no, did I say the wrong thing? Is that going on, or are you kind of in the role?
No, but the role encompasses a super hyper intensive awareness, alertness. Is this a ripoff? Are guys coming out of other cars trying to steal my money? Does this guy have a gun? Is he going to try and shoot me? Is the informant, is he working with the crook to take me out? That he's told a police officer, right? All these things are constantly going through your head because in a millisecond, the entire situation can change. And now I'm in a fight for my life. So you're constantly training your mind mentally. You're looking around. You're being observant. You're listening to everything this guy says. I'm looking at his hand motions. I'm looking at the way his head's moving. I'm looking at everybody walking past that car. I'm processing 1,000 things a second while I'm maintaining that cool, calm, collective. Hey, I'm just trying to make some money. I'm out here in the suburbs. I'm not a threat to anybody. Look at me. I'm in a suit. I don't even know how to shoot a gun, right? That's the conversation I'm having with this guy, kind of get him calm, get him to see me as no threat. I'm not one of these guys from the street. I don't look hard. I don't look rough. I don't look like a threat. The image that I'm trying to portray.
So when you think about working with one of these informants, what's in it for them? Do they get rolled? They got a low level offense and now you're rolling them to get the next guy, or like what's in it for them to help you?
Yeah, typically we have two types of informants. One who works for money, who has information and says, hey, I can introduce you to some people, but you have to pay me. But my particular informant, he got caught on a very small drug deal, but it was his third offense. So he's like trying to work off that charge. So he's not going back to jail for 20 years. So, you meet with the federal prosecutor, you make a proffer. Hey, you cooperate on so many operations. We'll cut time off your sentence, or maybe you don't even go to jail at all, depending on what kind of cases you help us develop. Right. So it's very intense scrutiny, monitoring, working with that informant, training him how to operate so he doesn't give himself up and get hurt, or more importantly, get the agents hurt. Right. So it's a delicate situation working with informants, because I know if you watch the news or you probably watch the movies, you see some informants, they go bad, right? They turn, and it turns into a problem. So working with the informants, you're taught that in the academy. A lot of psychology gets involved with that. It's not like, hey, just roll up on a guy and you're going to work with him, right? It's a lot of psychology, a lot of mental preparation goes into working with informants.
So are you involved? Is the DEA itself involved in cutting that deal? Or is it like, rather the DEA, of course, but are the agents that are actually working with the informant involved with brokering that deal? Or is that kind of handed off and they come back with the attorney? Like you say, we want to use this guy. We want to use him for these 10 operations. Like we'll cut this much off of his sentence, and then you're brokering that, or somebody else handles that. They just come back to you.
Well, every informant I've managed, I've like, get yourself an attorney, right? There's an arrest. He gets an attorney, whether it's a public defender or private attorney. You meet with him, say, hey, my client, he agrees to work with DEA. You can meet with him without me being present. So then you meet with the informant. He says, this is what I can do. So, okay, let me go talk to the United States attorney. So I'll go talk to the U.S. attorney. He says, okay, what's this guy's record? Is he a threat to the community? Okay, he's not a threat to the community. Low-level drug dealer. Okay, let's give him, he does 3 or 4 deals for us, and we'll cut 10 to 5 years off his sentence. All right. I get back to the informant. I says, what we can do for you. He says, okay, that works for me and my attorney. Then we begin the work. He signed some paperwork. He's documented. All the paperwork's there. His confidentiality is of the highest importance to us. And if we can work it out so he doesn't have to testify, that's even better. But he also knows, he or she knows, they may have to testify as part of the agreement.
And so is there any component of like witness protection that comes after that then that you're involved with in terms of if they did have to testify in one of these trials?
Well, most of the cases I had were low level, but there have been, I know other agents I worked with had very high level informants who were providing information on serious drug trafficking organizations in Detroit that would not hesitate to kill an individual who was testifying against them. So there have been some informants I've worked with that did go into witness protection, did have to testify, and they go into what they call WOODSAC, right? The witness protection, working with U.S. Marshals. They get relocated in another part of the country. So the FBI does that all the time with some of the informants. They work with the mafia cases. Of course, very high level. Propensity for violence is also very high. So you want to take all the precautions to keep these individuals safe because, if the perception is the government's not protecting people who work with them, then why work with them at all?
For sure. So as you progress now in Detroit, how does that trajectory go, right? You're going from these kind of low level offenses, and how long you spend in Detroit before you move on to your next assignment?
Well, again, when I watched 60 Minutes, my whole purpose of going to DEA was to get to South America. So within 2 weeks of going to the Detroit division, an announcement came out recruiting for agents to go to what they call Operation Snowcap, paramilitary operations training in Central and South America. But you had to go to selection phase at the U.S. Army Ranger Training School in Fort Benning, Georgia. So I put in my paperwork. My boss comes out, says, "What are you doing? You just got here. You're at PS7, which is entry level, and now you're trying to go off and be a ranger?" He says, "That's not why you joined DEA." I said, "That's why I joined DEA." He says, "Well, you're going to hurt your career." I said, "I'll make it up. I've got time, but I joined DEA specifically to go to this program." Of course, you couldn't stop me. So I put my paperwork in. Again, right place, right time. 2 weeks later, got a call announcement saying, "Hey, we got a selection phase coming up in a couple, like 2 or 3 weeks. Get in shape. You're going to come down to Benning, Georgia to the Army Ranger assessment for 1 week. And if you pass the assessment, you're going to go on to the 3-month training program." And I was gone. Again, packed my bag.
So you were in Detroit for like a month?
I was in Detroit probably for like a month, maybe 2 months.
Wow.
Right.
Okay.
I'm going off to Ranger selection. So, when you're in the Army and you go to Ranger selection, you have the benefit of going to basic training, right? You're training, you're running, you're swimming, you're getting your mind prepared to do whatever it is the Army wants you to do. But when you're a civilian, right, I'm going to the local YMCA gym, not really working out that intensely, and suddenly I'm going down to Ranger assessment. So I Googled, what is Ranger assessment? I had no idea, right? A lot of swimming. I didn't swim at the time. Wasn't a big water guy. A lot of running, a lot of rucking, weightlifting, physical fitness, martial arts. So I went out and I found as many classes as I could in all those things. Went to the Y, learned how to swim so I could pass the basic swim test in Ranger school. Took some basic jiu-jitsu, was on the track running, lifting weights, trying to get myself mentally and physically prepared for that assessment. So go down to the assessment. There's about like 100 agents. We lost 50% of the agents through the first week, right? Had a lot of really fit, muscular guys, and they just washed out because they didn't have the oxygen endurance. It's all about running and carrying. It's not about a lot of muscle. I was 24. I think after assessment, I was like 130 pounds.
Oh my, okay.
Serious weight, right? But made it through to the selection phase. So then after that, I went back to Detroit. And then a couple weeks later, I went down to the 3-month Ranger training program in Fort Benning, Georgia.
So what was the opinion of these Army guys of you? Were you guys outsiders? Was there kind of a rift between you guys or not really?
No, it was, we were all kind of like in that same brotherhood, right? The Ranger cadre, these are like real deal, hard school Rangers who've been downfield, a lot of experience, and they were they're like, "Hey, you guys aren't Army. You're not Rangers. You'll never be Rangers, but we're going to get you through this course and you're going to function like a Ranger. And believe me, we're not giving you any breaks. We're going to treat you just like you were an Army cadet coming in to Ranger school," right? So out of that 50, we lost another small percentage of people. A lot of agents just didn't want somebody telling them what to do. In your face, get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, do a 70-mile ruck march, climb a hill, no food, no sleep. A lot of guys were like, "This is not for me." So they left. And then what you had is a small, maybe we had 25 to 30 guys actually got through that program.
Talk to me about what the difference between DEA basic training was and Ranger battalion training. Like how much of an increase in physical demand and mental demand is there?
Oh, it's night and day. I mean, you go to the DEA Academy, they spend a lot of money getting you there. They want you to get through, right? But it's a different mission. But when you go to Ranger School, it's like we want to wash out as many people as we can. Our mission is to break as many people as we can, because when we have people downrange in the field, you cannot break. You cannot run home. You cannot call 911. You have to be ready, as the Rangers say, lead the way. So the mission of the military is much different than the mission of law enforcement. So the training is also somewhat different.
What did you take away from Ranger School that like still stuck with you through the whole of your career? Like what were the core tenets that never left you?
Man, it was the brotherhood. It was the fraternity. Talking to the Ranger cadre. I mean, these guys were like blood family, right? Different, no matter your color, your race, your religion, none of that mattered. All mattered what you got. You had that tab that said Ranger. You went through the assessment. Now you're part of the brotherhood. And it was that camaraderie, which I really loved. And I second guessed my career choice. I think I was like, I should have went to the Army and after college, and then this should have been my career path because it just seemed to fit for me.
Mm-hmm. And so from there, what? You finish, you have your Ranger tab, and now what do you get to do with it?
Well, we didn't get the tab. We weren't actually Rangers,
okay.
Per se, but we got certainly the training. And, I would never, stolen valor, I would never claim to be a Ranger, but certainly I got pretty close to it, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, we got through the selection phase, we got through the training, and then we were assigned operational teams. My team I got assigned to a team to work in Bolivia, in a small city called Trinidad on the border of Colombia and the Amazon jungle. At that point, Bolivia was and is a large producer of coca paste that gets shipped to Colombia for cocaine refinement. So there were a lot of cocaine labs in Bolivia, a lot of airstrips. Our job was to go out, search and destroy, find the airstrips, find the cocaine labs, find the precursor chemical stash hubs, and take them out and arrest people. So you go down to Bolivia and then you meet your counterparts. We're working with a group called the UMAPAR, which were Bolivian Special Forces, counter-narcotic paramilitary police. So we teamed up with them, and then we just planned and executed our missions. So
I don't know how much you can get into it, but give me a broad scope of what one of these missions looks like. Like what are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, for example, I was sitting at base camp one day, and an informant comes in and says, "Hey, there's a large airstrip like 200 miles away from here in the jungle that they cut out that has a large quantity of cocaine. I think they're flying in a small plane's coming with maybe 600 or 700 kilograms of cocaine." So everybody else was out on a mission. It was just me and a couple of my UMAPAR guys and my supervisor. He's like, "Hey, go out with these guys, take 2 helos, fly out to this area and see if there's anything there." So everybody was kind of skeptical. The informant just walked in, drew us a really rough map and says, "I'm telling you, man, I worked at this site. This plane's coming in a couple hours. You can get there. You can grab the 600 kilos, get a plane, and make some arrests." So we gear up. I gear up, me and one other agent. We jump on 2 birds with 7 or 8 UMAPA, and we fly out to the area. It takes about 2.5 hours to get there. So as we're getting there from the air, we can see the plane is on the ground. The plane had crashed and was burning. And there was a red truck with what looked like a large allotment of narcotics in the back. And as we're coming in on the 2 helos, right, and one helo comes in, drops off, second one's is flying security. So we say, "Okay, hey, look, 1 helo, you guys go down, take over the scene with the plane. The helo I'm in, we're going to follow that red truck's now moving with the cocaine. We're going to follow that truck." So 1 helo comes down, they're taking fire, they come in, they land, guys get out, they take over that situation. My helo with 4 or 5 UMAPA, we're following that truck. And now it's trying to get to a trail that goes into the jungle where you have triple canopy coverage. We would lose it. So we're getting close to it. Someone's in the back firing at us. So, the pilot's doing his emergency action maneuvers to avoid getting hit. The truck hits the brakes. 4 guys jump out and they run into the jungle. Our helo lands. My team jumps out. We run past the truck. Now we're trying to pursue these guys to catch them. But it's dense. I mean, if anybody's ever seen triple canopy jungle, it's just like thick vegetation. So now we have to slow down because now we're possibly in an ambush situation. We can't see 6 feet in front of us, but we can hear these guys moving and running. So we're still trying to track them. So at some point, a couple of rounds are coming back our way. We take cover and we just say, hey, you know what? We can't see anything. We're getting too far from our initiation point. Let's just pull back because we don't want to get hurt. We got the drugs. Let's just call it. So we go back to the truck. There's about 600 kilograms of coca paste, which they're going to try and fly out to Colombia to get refined. So huge operation. We go back to the scene, take the truck back. It was a major transition hub where surrounding drug labs would bring coca paste. A small Cessna would land. Coca paste would go on the Cessna, would fly to Colombia to a cocaine processing lab. So they had like a huge camp. They had tents, food, generators. So we caught like 7 or 8 people. So that was like a typical operation.
Just that. Yeah. Just another day in the office, right? So for sake of reference, in terms of like coca paste like that, 600 kilos of that, how much does that become in terms of refined cocaine?
Well, if you get 600 kilograms of coca paste, which is really crack cocaine, right? It's the unrefined version. That goes to a lab where they put hydrochloric acid in it. And at that point, it's refined cocaine. It can be snorted. It can be injected. Mm-hmm. There's a number of ways you can take it. So the value, of course, goes up. So a kilo of coca paste, back in, 1992 in the jungle, maybe that's worth $300 or $400. By the time it becomes a refined kilogram of cocaine, maybe it's worth $1,500 to $2,000. But by the time that kilo gets to Detroit, it's worth $40,000. Mm. So you see, it's very cheap to produce, but by the time it gets processed and transshipped to the marketplace, Detroit, New York, Chicago, LA, price then goes up to $35,000, $40,000.
So how often are you doing operations like that? Is this a thing like where once every couple of weeks you get a tip and you go and bust someone, or is this happening with more frequency than that?
We were in Bolivia, which we were rolling operations every day. I mean, every day we had informants coming in. There was something going on, whether there was another precursor chemical storage hub. We did an operation on tracking precursors that are used to make coca paste and cocaine. There were clandestine airstrips we would find, and we'd hit them and go blow them up so the planes couldn't land. There were cocaine storage hubs where cocaine was hidden in small huts in various locations. We go out and demo those and it was a search and destroy mission. Develop the intel and go out and make it as hard as possible for these traffickers to produce coca paste and cocaine. Because these labs are in isolated parts of the jungle. They have to have generators. They have to have gasoline. They have to have fresh water. So they always had to be near a water source. But can you imagine moving a 300-pound generator deep into the jungle? And then bringing in the gasoline, the infrastructure capabilities were incredible, right? I mean, these guys could put together a lab, cut an airstrip out of triple canopy jungle in 2 weeks, right? And then we find it and destroy it, and they have to go find something else. So as we continue to progress, we push traffickers further and further into deeper, denser jungle, which made it harder for them to make these laboratories, to make these airstrips, to hide cocaine in the jungle. It cost them a lot of money and a lot of manpower. So that was really the success of Snowcap, at least in Bolivia, where I was working.
How did they have the logistical power that they had? Is it a matter of they have so much money from the drug trade that they can just buy anything they want? Or is it that they have so much manpower because of the local, economy or whatever it might be? How do they have so much power in that way?
Well, you think you're out in the jungle, so you have a lot of indigenous people, farmers, very poor, very, very poor. Cartel comes and says, hey, we'll give you $100 for day labor. Hundreds of people show up, right? If the government's not going to take care of us, then we'll take the money from the cartels. I really can't blame the indigenous people for supporting this operation, trying to feed their families, or trying to make a living, right? Cartel's taking advantage of them. So cartel comes out, pays them money. Money's no object, right? Because they're making tens of millions of dollars. Gets 50, 60 people to come out, make an airstrip, hires them to produce the narcotics, hires them to load the plane, right? So typically, when we hit these locations, we're not really looking to arrest the locals, but we're looking for those cartel members that are running the operation and take them out, take out the managers, the logistic people, the people who are coordinating and developing these sites. The locals are arrested, and then usually they're released later on to go back to their families.
So you're there, you're in Bolivia. Then what? What's next? Where's the next place you stop?
Well, I did Snowcap for about 4 years.
Wow.
1990 and 1996, roughly 4 or 5 years, and the program got shut down. We were in Colombia, we were in Peru. I did Snowcap operations in Honduras and Guatemala. But in Bolivia, it got to the point where we were doing such a good job, right? The Bolivian government says, all right, well, we got to kind of restrict your activities. There's a lot of complaints. And they show us a big map, and they're like, the green areas where you can go, the red areas where you can't go. So we're like, well, we already cleaned out the green area. There's nothing there. All the drug labs are in the red area. Well, that's no-go zone. So there were issues on operational authority, where we could go, what we could do. And at some point in time, I guess the administration, US DEA administration says, you know what, it's just not worth it. We're putting a lot of money into this program and we're being restrained, right? So we shut down that Operation Snowcap. And what you're seeing now, for example, like in Ecuador, US boots on the ground, right? DEA was the first. We were the first to put boots on the ground and initiate paramilitary operations going after the cartels in all the critical countries. If we had maintained that program, we would not be in the situation we are in today with what I call the metastasization of cartels, drug cartels, into narco-terrorist organizations. Just my view.
Yeah. So how much of that, obviously at a certain point, it becomes that the Bolivian government is corrupt in some way, it would seem, right? If they were on the take for not letting you go in certain areas, how much of it was politicking and making sure that you had good relationships with these governments in order to be able to do the operations we need to do for our own benefit?
Well, everybody needs to understand, law enforcement, especially when you're looking at working in foreign countries, goes through the U.S. Embassy. It's diplomatic relationships that keep U.S. boots on the ground, and kept that program working. But at some point in time, that relationship with the Bolivian government, especially under its former president Morales, who basically ended the U.S. Embassy, kicked everybody out, and then Bolivia became the largest producer of coca paste in South America, which increased the volume of cocaine production in Colombia. So, it's at that diplomatic level, right? We see that breakdown in Mexico with President Sheinbaum, right? We see that corruption, that corrupted element. And I'm not saying the Mexican government is corrupt, I don't know, but certainly there are elements, as we have shown through DEA investigations, that there is part of that government is corrupt. But that's at the diplomatic level. So if we have bad relationships with countries that are deemed narco countries or countries that are producing the precursors, like in China, if that diplomatic relationship is not ideal, like it is with El Salvador's president Bukele, then America will suffer. And that makes the drug war, if you want to call it that, much more difficult to orchestrate.
What would be if you put yourself in the mind's eye of someone in that, governmental leadership, they have the backing of the U.S. to come in and stop some of these organizations inside their country. Why would they not want to have that happen? And they're more incentivized by these cartels and the things that they can offer them, or is it a fear of like physical safety from the cartels in their country? Or I in my brain, you'd say, well, I'll just take the backing of the U.S. government and then we'll crush these people in our country. But I suppose maybe they're personally incentivized or.
Well, I mean, that's a complicated question. I mean, let's talk about Pablo Escobar and the Medellin cartel, right? Mm-hmm. Pablo Escobar was the world's first narco-terrorist, in my opinion, put together the first global cartel called the Medellin cartel. He put hundreds of millions of dollars into the local economy. He paid police officers, judges, money to the president. He bought that country, basically. And that's when he was low-level drug trafficker. And everybody said he's just a drug trafficker. Well, take the money, and so what? He's sending cocaine to the United States. But once you develop that relationship with a drug trafficker, like Pablo Escobar, there's no getting out. There's no breakup, right? Once you're in the bed with the cartels, it's forever. And there's only one way out. And that's, as Pablo Escobar would say, take the money or take the lead. And at some point, Escobar became so big that he thought he could take over the country of Colombia. And the government pushed back and said, no, you're a drug trafficker, you're not a politician. And that's when he went to war We saw the first narco war with a country of Colombia. And then there was like the U.S., you got to help us, right? So the U.S. went in, we helped take out Escobar and the Medellin cartel, and we declared victory and went home. And then you had the Cali cartel pop up. And then the Cali cartel said, hey, we're not violent like Escobar. Here's a whole lot of money to the president. We'll help you get elected. Just don't mess with us. The president said yes, he took the money. And then you had the Cali cartel become the second world's largest global cartel, right? Again, DEA had to come in, help them. We shut down the Cali cartel, raised the flag and went home. Well, then another cartel popped up. We didn't seem to realize or understand that this is a cancer that will just keep coming back unless you take it out, pull it up at the roots, and end it. You cannot just dismantle it because the pieces will automatically come back together.
So is that, not to jump way forward into the future, but I want to, is that kind of what we're seeing with Maduro and some of the things that we saw that happened with the most recent capture of him? I know that it's a little bit different than cartel because it's more like state funded production of things, but how does the destabilization of a country like that tie into the destabilization of a cartel? Is it similar?
Well, let's look at the expansion of the cartel, right? Venezuela, we used to have a DEA office in Caracas, right? We worked very closely with Venezuela because Venezuela was a key transition hub, right? All the cocaine coming up from Colombia and Bolivia would go to Venezuela, and from there would go out maritime in containers to the US and Europe. It would go via Go Fast through the Caribbean into Miami, which is how Escobar moved tons of cocaine through the Caribbean through Venezuela, or would go small aircraft from Venezuela to Honduras or Guatemala, where it'd go into a truck, go to Mexico, and then go into the United States. Well, the cartels realized that Venezuela was so critical. And then when you had that power shift in Venezuela, and previous to Maduro, the president, I cannot remember his name, but he became the first really narco president of a country. So he passes away, and then Maduro comes in and he intensifies that. So then now Maduro says, I will provide military top cover for the cartels. You bring in all your drugs, you pay me a percentage, and you can do maritime transshipment, you can do Go Fast, and I'm even working with Hezbollah. Hezbollah's in Venezuela. The Iranian proxy group, terrorist group, was heavily involved in cocaine trafficking. DEA has a number of cases we identified under the Obama administration. The Hezbollah was moving cocaine to finance its terror operations in the Middle East. You had the Russians there, you had the Chinese there. Maduro was a key player in preventing or providing a significant national security threat to the United States for years. But no administration was willing to deal with it. So the cartel simply took advantage of that. They pumped multiple tons of cocaine through Venezuela that went out through Go Fast, through the Caribbean, into the United States. Maritime, the submersibles going from I believe it's the west coast of Venezuela into California. So Venezuela was a critical staging hub for cocaine coming into the United States.
So with the power shift, now presumably power vacuum, I would imagine that happens in Venezuela. How do we make sure that we don't do the same thing we did before, which is plant our flag and walk away and then let the next person pop up?
Well, that's the question, right? Because Maduro, he's gone, but his people are still there now working with our administration. So really it remains to be seen. As my understanding is that the cocaine transshipment has reduced to less than maybe 3 to 4%. There's still a couple of traffickers on the side trying to smuggle out. And of course, as soon as they hit the water, there's a drone strike coming. So I think it was a success in the sense that it significantly shut down Venezuela as an open drug hub and paramilitary base for the cartel. So it remains to be seen what the current administration in Venezuela is going to do and how they're going to work with President Trump, at least for the next 3 years. So let's just say for the time being, that's a success. So now we're seeing operations in Ecuador, U.S. boots on the ground, which is another key transition hub for the cartels.
Mm-hmm. So I want to get back to your career here. So from Snowcap, where do we go?
Well, back to Detroit after that. And then I had developed such an interest in working overseas. One of my supervisors came to me and says, hey, I know you like working overseas. There's a position in Pakistan. So DEA has, offices in over 90 different countries in the world, 60 offices in 90 different countries, right? So I was like, hey, that sounds pretty interesting. Let's go to Pakistan. For the term of the tour was 6 years if you wanted to stay, but you had to do at least 3. So I did 6. And then I came back and did another 6. I did almost 12 years in Pakistan.
What years did you have been in Pakistan?
1999 to 2008. And then I went back, 2004. Then I went back 2008 to 2010. And then I was there for 9/11. And then I went to Afghanistan working with the 101st Airborne as an intelligence assistant to their military operations. And then I was promoted to country attaché in India. So I went to New Delhi. I ran counter-drug operations in the embassy for all Southeast Asia, which included Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and the Maldives. So I would cover that whole region, coordinating counter-narcotic investigations, intelligence development, working with host country counterparts, trying to disrupt the flow of heroin coming from Afghanistan via Pakistan, going all throughout Southeast Asia.
My goodness. So, I mean, there's so many things I want to break down inside that last paragraph you gave us. First off, this feels like meteoric rise. Like you go from field agent, like in Detroit for a couple months, Ranger selection, Snowcap, all these like, direct action missions. And then now it's like, now you're, granted, I guess you just covered what, 15 years of time, 20 years, but now you're the country attaché. I mean, you are just like launching through this organization, it would seem, which is awesome, right? There's nothing more to say about that than, props to you. It's pretty impressive, the rise. But we can't skip over the idea that you were in Pakistan when 9/11 happened is a pretty crazy thing. So talk to me about what that experience was like. It's such a unique experience to have, to be really at the epicenter of where the attack was coming from, pretty darn close at least. What was the vibe like? What was the notification? Bring me through that actual day. Like, I can't imagine.
We were, in Islamabad, Pakistan was probably one of the largest embassies in the world, had probably one of the best relationships with host country counterparts at that time, 1999. 9/11 happens. We're playing, we had big softball league with the other embassies, the British, the French, who all come to U.S. Embassy, we play softball. So we're all playing softball. I think we were a little bit ahead of time there. And then one of the Marines comes out and says, hey, the U.S. is under attack. 2 planes just went into the buildings and it's Al-Qaeda. So of course we all knew Al-Qaeda was in Afghanistan working with the Taliban. So softball game's over, everybody runs home, everybody gears up, because we're thinking the embassy is going to get hit, because obviously that's the next target. So the intel is Taliban is coming into Islamabad, which is where the embassy is, and we could get hit. So now it's, everybody's back at the embassy, everybody's geared up, and we're waiting for that hit. And it never came, right? Never happened. Everything was happening in Afghanistan. So DEA, of course, is working with the U.S. military. Hey, we've got guys in Islamabad. If you need any help, we can help. So the call came to the U.S. Embassy. Hey, let's get some DEA folks up to Afghanistan, because at that time we had DEA agents, in Kabul working directly targeting narco-terrorism. We called it narco-terrorism at that time because the Taliban was heavily involved in heroin trafficking to fund their counterinsurgency terrorist activities. So again, DEA was one of the first called out, but everybody disagreed with the concept of what is a terrorist, right? Mm-hmm. So the word comes down, the boss comes in and says, hey, who wants to go to Afghanistan? Of course, my hand goes up immediately. I'm like, this is what I trained to do. Mm-hmm. So we sent a couple agents came in from other locations. We sent up about 7 of us went up to Afghanistan at Kabul just when the airport was just being taken over. And we set up base there. I was there for about 6 months. We were supporting the 101st Airborne. We were debriefing Taliban detainees, Al-Qaeda detainees, trying to get that intelligence, write up the assessments and pass it off to Army intelligence. So we did that for about 6 months, then went back to Pakistan and resumed my duties there. And at that time, we were heavily tracking cocaine, or not cocaine, but heroin, which was being smuggled out of Afghanistan through Pakistan, through an area called Balochistan, down to the Gulf Coast, and then going to Yemen. And from Yemen, it goes into Europe. So the Brits were down there working. They had some really high-speed counter-drug units working. So the boss was like, hey, who wants to go down to Balochistan and work with the Brits? Of course, my hand goes up again. I'll work with the Brits, some special forces guys. So went down with them, and we set up surveillance posts within some of the smaller cities. It's just like 2 or 3 of us in a safe house, stacked with food and ammunition, just kind of keeping track of what's happening, ready to go back the intelligence. Hey, we see some Taliban movement, we see some Al-Qaeda movement. et cetera. So did that for a couple of months, went back to Pakistan. Of course, my tour ended, and then I got the promotion to India. So before going to India, I actually did almost a year in Tajikistan as the country attaché working in Central Asia, tracking precursor chemicals coming in to Afghanistan, heroin going out through Tajikistan into the Caucasus and perhaps into Russia and Europe. So did that for a year, then went to India. After India, I did some domestic time in Hartford, Connecticut, 2 years. And then I was like, I don't like domestic enforcement. I got to go back overseas. That's where I'm good, right? Mm-hmm. So a job came up in Myanmar, otherwise known as Burma. So I went to Myanmar, and their problem was methamphetamine production, right? Myanmar is the world's largest producer of methamphetamine in the jungles by the insurgency groups. A lot of it goes to Australia. So interestingly enough, I went out and I met with my counterparts, and I said, how can I help you as a DEA agent in Myanmar? Because we can't go into the jungles. That's where all the insurgency groups are, can't go in, military, it's a no-go zone. But that's where all the labs are. So I said to the counterparts, I said, well, methamphetamine is 100% synthetic, which means it needs chemicals. Where do all the chemicals come in? So we go up to the border of Myanmar, and it's like, all these trucks are coming in from China with all kinds of cargo, chemicals, construction. And I go, well, what's coming in? He says, we don't know. We look at the documentation. It's in Mandarin. We can't read Mandarin. So we're waving trucks in. I said, you don't have a law enforcement problem. You have a technology problem. You need the right technology so you can scan the chemicals coming in and identify if they're actually what they say they are, or are they chemicals being used for methamphetamine? And they said, well, we have no idea what you're talking about. And neither did I, right? Degree in technology and management, never used it in almost 25 years, but suddenly now I got to use this degree. So I start researching equipment that can be used to identify unknown substances. So a couple companies come up. One of them is Rigaku, the company I work with now. At that time, they had a handheld laser called a CQL. And basically what that laser does, if you point it into a substance, the laser hits the substance and it can tell you what it is. So if it's P2P, which is an essential precursor for methamphetamine, it says, boom, this is a precursor for methamphetamine, you got to take it. If it's a chemical, let's say it's thionyl chloride, but the label says hydrogen peroxide. We scan it, it says thionyl chloride. Well, thionyl chlorides were the essential chemicals to make methamphetamine. So we seize it. So I wrote up a pilot program. I got $250,000. I bought 3 of the Rigaku units, trained some of the officers, and said, here you go. Let's go see if this mitigation tool to go after the chemicals will be successful in degrading the capability of the cartels to mass produce methamphetamine. So within 6 months, they seized over $60 million of precursor chemicals that could have made $100 million of methamphetamine. So the program, in theory, was a success, right? So my plan was to go out and buy 100 of these units and put together this border interdiction program with 100% inspection on everything coming in that we thought could be a precursor or chemical or equipment to make methamphetamine. But of course, now you're affecting trade, right? Trade with China with Myanmar was worth billions of dollars. So that program by the upper administration, other people said, yeah, you can't do that, right? But that program was so successful that the traffickers in Myanmar called the traffickers in China and said, we got a problem. They're using this new equipment on the border that's telling them what these chemicals are. So the traffickers said, well, we're going to go we'll take care of it. So like one day, one of the checkpoints got attacked. Officer was killed, and the handheld unit, Rigaku unit, was destroyed. So at that point, we were like, you know what? The chemicals are more important than the drugs because we seize hundreds of metric tons of methamphetamine every year. There's never any pushback because you can make more drugs as long as you have the chemicals. But as soon as you put a kink in that precursor chemical supply chain, now the drug production slows down. That cannot happen with large-scale drug production. So for me, if I had a huge budget and cooperation from both the U.S. and Myanmar government, I think I could have shut down precursor chemical trafficking by more than 90% just by using technology attacking the critical border entry points alone.
And for sake of reference, at this point in time, what was the level of, Raman spectroscopy would be what the unit's doing, right? What was the level of involvement in that technology in this field at all? Was it being used at laboratory, or was it being used like I don't have a great reference for how prevalent it was in this industry at this point.
Well, in Southeast Asia, no one even knew what Raman spectroscopy was. Not even myself. Couldn't even pronounce the word. Right. So I was really the first one to introduce Raman spectroscopy to Southeast Asia in this concept. Now it's being used everywhere for counter drugs, especially with precursor chemicals. Right. That's the real, for me, Raman spectroscopy was the linchpin to understanding the chemicals, because there's over 100 different chemicals can be used to make methamphetamine. But a lot of them are legitimate. But if you didn't know if the label says one thing, hydrogen peroxide, and it's thionyl chloride or sodium hydroxide or some of these other essential precursors, you don't know what it is, so you can't stop it, right? So at the points of entry, you simply have to scan it and you can seize it. No shootouts, but I'm focusing on chemicals, not on arrests, not on drug seizures. But the metric for success for DEA is arrest and drug seizures, right? There's no metric for precursor chemical seizures at that time. So I really pushed back saying, hey, arrests are good if we can get them. But the arrests don't degrade drug trafficking capabilities. We've seen that for 30 years. I've seen extraditions. I've seen kingpins go down, and the organizations still exist. You have to go after what is the center of gravity of drug trafficking? It's precursor chemicals. That is the lifeblood for fentanyl, for heroin, for cocaine, and methamphetamine. Where do the majority of those precursors come from? Well, they're coming from China. But now we're back at that diplomatic level where we have to have that cooperation with foreign counterparts to really make any impact on the precursor chemical trafficking.
So when we think about precursor chemical trafficking, right, it's like historically we were dealing with more naturally occurring drugs that we're talking about, opium and cocaine and stuff like that. When was the major shift historically from naturally occurring drugs to now synthetic drugs, which seems to be leading the market?
Well, cocaine, you have to have acidic anhydride to produce cocaine, right? Cocaine is what we call semi-synthetic. It's semi-synthetic, meaning half of it's synthetic, half of it is natural, because it comes from the coca plant. So you need coca plant to make coca paste, and then you need acidic anhydride to make cocaine HCl, so it can be injected or smoked. So there's always been a huge equation for going after the precursors. And we knew that, 20, 30 years ago, but trying to find those containers of acidic anhydride coming from China or perhaps India was very, very difficult, because the cartels knew we can put a container in with thousands of other containers, and if you don't have the specific intelligence, you're not going to find it. And that's how the cartels are beating us now with precursor chemical transshipments, right? We need better technology, better AI. We need to understand the shipping routes, who's shipping it, how it's being shipped, and we need to intercept those shipments to break that precursor chemical supply chain.
Mm-hmm. So from your time in Myanmar, what's next? What are we doing?
Myanmar, I do 2 years in Myanmar. I come back, I go to DEA headquarters where I'm supporting foreign operations. And then I get selected to be on a fentanyl task force composed of various federal agencies, to include the FBI and some intelligence groups. And basically we're working in a skiff, looking at the fentanyl situation and trying to come up with solutions to degrade the capability of the cartels to mass produce fentanyl.
So talk to me about the fentanyl problem, where it came from, how it's being utilized now. And obviously we've seen, even in the last, I don't know what you would say, a decade, it going from very seldomly around to everywhere and everything. I don't know what the actual timeline looked like that, but it really seems like it's ramped up and now at its height.
Fentanyl, it's complicated history, right? I mean, you go back to Purdue Pharma, production of OxyContin, which was very addictive, and the owners of Purdue Pharma knew that OxyContin was extremely addictive, and we saw, for the 12 or 13 years they were in operation, we saw numbers of fatal overdoses linked to OxyContin, right? It's extremely addictive. So let's just say 2018, what was it, 2018, OxyContin, it's blowing up, it's everywhere, right? Now we see a little bit of fentanyl coming from China, directly from China into the United States. So you have fentanyl addiction occurring, you have OxyContin addiction. So at some point in time, the government says, okay, we got to regulate OxyContin, and suddenly it's cut off, right? If you've got a prescription, you only get 6 pills, whereas you were getting 12, 13 pills, unlimited amount. But OxyContin is very close in structure to heroin, right? So people got cut off, like say West Virginia, they got cut off from their Oxycontin. They then went to heroin, right? They became addicted. This time, fentanyl is being restricted by the Chinese with an agreement with the US to come into the United States. So that stream has been somewhat degraded. But the cartels, being entrepreneurs, see that fentanyl is extremely addictive. And they say, well, let's put a little fentanyl in the heroin and see what happens. So then people were buying heroin with fentanyl in it, and they're like, man, this is great. This is a really good high. Then we saw this huge addiction to heroin with fentanyl. Then the cartel said, well, let's cause what I call a forced transition from one addiction to another. So everybody on heroin then shifted to fentanyl, right? Because it was better. And the cartels looped in and said, this is a gold mine because we've created a new paradigm of drug addiction. People who are not predisposed to heroin, cocaine, and methamphetamine are now hooked on fentanyl. So let's mass produce all these pills and let's just put it on the street and see what happens. So suddenly they're mass producing hundreds of millions of pills with almost 2.5 milligrams or 2 milligrams of fentanyl, which is a lethal dose. That's when we saw like 100,000 people die 4 to 5 years ago, right? 100,000, 200,000. I think over the last 6 years, 300,000 people have died from these fentanyl pills because the dosage amount is so high. And some say it's a poisoning, some say it's an overdose. That's a different conversation for another time. But it was killing a lot of people. But the cartels realized that fentanyl is the golden drug because it's completely synthetic, right? So if you're producing heroin, you have to have good weather. You have to have workers in the field. Cocaine, the same thing. A lot of overhead. With fentanyl, I just need 4 or 5 precursors, a small space, and I can turn, a couple of kilos into thousands and thousands of fentanyl pills that I can sell all across the country. So the cartels realized the cash cow on fentanyl, and it hit everywhere. All the domestic drug trafficking groups were now buying fentanyl, either in pill or powder form from the cartels and selling it through their re-chain outlets across the United States, which brings us to this incredible fentanyl addiction that we're seeing now affecting every state in the country.
So as fentanyl rises up as this, I think that we've also seen it laced in everything. So it's like we've seen people buy cocaine and it has fentanyl. People have, the question I've seen or seen asked is, well, why would the drug dealer make drugs that kill people? What would be the purpose of that, right? They theoretically want to keep their customer coming back. What would be the point of lacing fentanyl into cocaine and killing the user, right? I don't know. Is there any logic to that? That's a great question. I get asked that question all the time. Why would you kill your customers? I remember a case back in Detroit, back when I was there. A bad batch of heroin came out. It had some cut in it that was extremely toxic, and a number of people died. So the police, we came out hard. We're hitting all the dealers. Hey, you're selling heroin. That's killing people. We want to know who it is. Of course, the street has a way of taking care of itself. So whoever was selling that bad heroin, those individuals were taken out by other cartels or other street dealers saying, hey, this is not good business. You bring the heat on the police. The police come on us. They shut us down. So the word got out that, hey, we took care of our own problem and we took out those guys. So we can ease up on the enforcement, and the enforcement did ease up, and the problem self-corrected. But of course, cartels and drug traffickers, they all evolve, right? The cartels are making so much money with fentanyl. The whole marketing strategy changed. They said, okay, we'll flood fentanyl into the US. We know it's going to kill 100,000 people, but it's going to addict another 500,000, and we're going to make billions of dollars. So the cartel mentality changed to acceptable collateral damage in order to make a greater profit. So then your domestic drug trafficking group said, hey, we can make a lot of money. So what? A few people die. That's not our intent to kill people, but if they take it and they die, so be it. But 10 people will take it and not die, and we're going to make a lot of money. So the whole cartel domestic drug trafficking marketing strategy changed to an acceptable casualty rate in order to increase market shares. Right?
Right? That's very draconian business. It's a very draconian business practice, right?
Yeah, and in all this kind of preparation to talk to you here, I've been researching and over, it just talks about how these cartels are businesses. They're not gangs, like as you would think about them historically. They are very much more similar to a Fortune 500 company than they are to like a street gang. Can you break me through that a little bit? Like the only thing I can think of in my head, and correct me, this might be crazy ignorant, is like a guy with a briefcase kisses his wife on the forehead and goes to work, and then like does spreadsheets for the narco terrorists. Is that a real thing? There's really like office buildings of people managing logistics and whatever the thing. Is it very similar to that?
Think about your top Fortune 500. Think about your top 10 Fortune 500 companies, global incorporates, right? Corporations where a product is made somewhere, Southeast Asia, Latin America, moves around the world, gets to market, gets advertised, gets sold, the money gets laundered or put back into account. You have your attorneys, you have logistics people, you have your support, your security, you have all these people, thousands of people that make these corporations run. That's what narco trafficking is today. When you think of Pablo Escobar, really the architect of global drug trafficking, he put that basic framework into place, right? The ability to move multiple tons of drugs from the jungle, first to order the precursors, right? That takes money. How do you move the money from the jungle to the precursors in China, to the companies? And how do those precursors then go through legitimate transit and then get moved to a jungle, right? Narcotics are produced. Then they're put on a plane in a container, shipped across the world, goes to a port, gets through customs, gets to the domestic trafficking or the foreign trafficking group who sells it, gets that money. They then launder hundreds of millions of dollars, right? You can't take it to the laundromat. You got to use international banks, right, to launder hundreds of millions of dollars. So now you need lawyers, you need accountants, you need people who understand how do you launder $100 million and get it from Central Europe, Southeast Asia, New York City, back to an account in the Cayman Islands. And then how does the Mexican trafficker get his money, right? You're talking about a very, very sophisticated Fortune 500 company with tens of thousands of employees that have the ability to operate in the shadows.
So I just can't help but think about it. Is there are there cartel job interviews? Is there like a board sitting somewhere hiring an accountant? That's applying for a job to do cartel accounting?
Think about your chemist, right? You need extremely smart individuals when I was in Myanmar, we always had intelligence that the Chinese, some of the best chemists in China were being recruited to go down into Myanmar and show them how to make methamphetamine using what I call unregulated chemicals, because the regulated chemicals were hard to smuggle in because they're on a list. You scan it with Raman spectroscopy, you seize it. So the chemists figured out a way to make what I call stage 1 precursors, right? Go into Home Depot, buy a bunch of chemicals, make your basic precursor that makes a stage 2 precursor that then makes stage 1, right? Your P2P, for example, or your acetic anhydride, right? Very sophisticated technology. So you need very educated PhDs who understand chemistry. So, hey, you know what? Here's a couple $100,000. We'll go down to Myanmar and teach these folks how to make methamphetamine, right? So then that chemistry gets transshifted to the cartels in Colombia and Mexico. Here's how you make your methamphetamine better. Here's how you make fentanyl better, right? The Chinese money launderers, they're the global money launderers for every criminal organization in the world now. That's been clearly established through DEA and other investigations. So you have these extremely smart people with very high intellect on how to move bulk cash, how to clean it, how to launder it, so you can then use it to purchase, right? Either bitcoins, the internet transition apps, mirroring money laundering. There's a dozen different ways to move hundreds of millions of dollars in the shadows. And it's very, very hard to find. So you're talking about a level of expertise, and of course the cartels have the money to pay for it. Here's a good example: El Chapo Guzman, when he was in jail in Mexico. His people came to see him and gave him a watch which had a GPS on it. They took that GPS location and they were able to plot it on a map in the prison. And they said, okay, we're going to build a tunnel 3 or 4 miles away in his house. And that tunnel is going to go down 12 feet and it's going to go for 4 miles and it's going to come up right in the shower. And then El Chapo goes to sit on the toilet out of the view of the camera. The floor opens up on a hydraulic press. He goes down and gets on a motorcycle that's on a railway track. You've got lights, ventilation. It's a Class A tunnel that he was able to build with hundreds of millions of dollars with an engineering firm, because these aren't guys with picks and hammers trying to figure out which way is north and which way is south, right? So he had to go hire a professional crew, and he kept it secret, and he just walked out of prison. That's the kind of money and capability the cartels have.
Yeah, it's endless. Like, what would you do if you had no bottom to your bank account, right? That's really what it is, right? So with that, talk about El Chapo. Let's talk El Mencho, right? The recent death in Mexico. So how does that destabilize the Mexican drug trade and the cartel war there?
Well, I think, this is due. President Sheinbaum's feeling a little bit of pressure from Trump administration. You have to do more. We need more than just extradition. We need you to go after the top leadership. CJ&G is the largest producer of fentanyl, New Jalisco Generation Cartel, followed by the Sinaloa Cartel. These are your two power brokers that really basically run Mexico. So the Sheinbaum government been putting a lot more pressure on these trafficking organizations going after the leadership. And of course, El Mencho was the head of the CJ&G cartel. But having been with DEA for 30 some years, it's good to see that guy removed. He was responsible for the mass murder of hundreds of thousands of Americans through the distribution of fentanyl. Good riddance. But I can guarantee you right now, CJ&G has another leader that's taken his place. And the problem with new drug cartel leaders is they have to come in and they have to be strong. So they're going to be more violent, harder to take down. They're going to kill more people. They're going to take on the government, because to keep that position, they have to be ruthless. So now we're going to see, and that's what we see in Mexico right now. We see CJ&G actually fighting what I would call a narco war, an insurgency with the government. And we've seen this when they took out El Chapo. We saw Sinaloa cartel push back. It's a point of weakness. CJ&G would then attack Sinaloa, and then you have the two cartels fighting, right? So you've had these two cartels fighting each other in Mexico for years, responsible for tens of thousands of deaths, non-combatants who aren't involved in drug trafficking at all. They're just caught in the middle of a civil war between two very large drug cartels. But now the government's pushing back and saying, okay, we're coming after you guys. And so they're pushing back. And so you've seen CJ&G shut down the trade routes, kidnapping people, disrupting activities all throughout Mexico. So, where does it go from here, right? Mm-hmm. The Mexican government, can they survive? They don't want U.S. direct assistance, but are they in a position where they can take over the cartels? And just like with Pablo Escobar, certain parts of the Mexican government have been corrupted. And that's just a fact. I'm not making that up. I'm not throwing out accusations. It's just a fact. But they've been taking the money. Some elements have been taking the money for so long that now it's very hard to extricate yourself from that situation. Like I say, you just don't walk away from the cartel after you've been working with them for years, right? And that's what Escobar's problem was. No, you took my money. Now you're going to do what I tell you to do. That's the nature of violent drug trafficking organizations.
So what's the future look like? I think that there's probably a lot of uncertainty. There's probably a lot of, unknowns, but at the same time, like the destabilization of Venezuela, the current state of Mexico, obviously there's a whole new layer with everything going on in Iran and some of the drug involvement there. How do we find some sort of global homeostasis again?
Like I said, over the last 3 to 4 years, we've seen 300 to 400,000 Americans die. And now we see more potent substances like nitazines, metanitazines, benzodiazepines being mixed in with fentanyl. And these new substances are 100% synthetic, and they're 50 to 100 times more powerful than fentanyl, right? So they can kill you at a much faster rate. So what we're seeing here is what I call the evolution of narcochemistry, being done mainly by domestic drug trafficking organizations who are saying, hey, we can put nitazines on the street with xylazine in it that we get offline or from a veterinarian, and we can make more money than fentanyl because it's a more powerful opioid. We need less of an amount. If you only need 1 milligram of fentanyl, maybe you just need a picogram or a nanogram of nitazine to get the same effect, but it's more deadly, right? So we're seeing this evolution. Now, it's great to take out Venezuela, and you could even take out Colombia, but that's not the problem for fentanyl. The fentanyl problem is a Mexican cartel origin. That's where that problem is. That's the center of gravity. If you want to stop the flow of fentanyl, it's very difficult because now we're back at that diplomatic level. If you put boots on the ground in Mexico and cause an international situation, very difficult to do, I think. So then you have to look at, well, how do we degrade the ability of the Mexican cartels to smuggle in multiple tons of fentanyl into the United States, right? And that answer, there is an answer, I believe, but it's a very complicated answer.
Let's hear it. So that's one thing you might get into it right here, but I want to understand how the drugs are getting in, because I think that that's a really interesting thing, because it's one thing to produce them, but they also have to get in and then get out into the streets too. So, but I don't want to cut you off. What's the Michael Brown version of how to stop it?
Well, if you look at drug production, as you said, right, you have the chemicals coming into Mexico, very difficult to stop the chemical flow because of the bad relationship, the diplomatic relationship with China. I don't think we're ever going to see a resolution there where the Chinese are going to say, hey, PRC is going to say, hey, we're going to help you mitigate that problem, because we know who those people are, right? DEA said, hey, we know these companies are sending chemicals. What are you going to do about it? Well, we'll get around to it. That's not happening. So I don't think we can wait for the Chinese to help us, the PRC to help us with that problem. So number one, you have what I call 6 critical capabilities the cartels need to function. The first one is they have to be able to get the precursors. The second one is they have to be able to make it in a clandestine laboratory, right? Then you have your communications. They have to be able to talk, internet, via telephone apps, secure communications, right? That's another critical function. Then, of course, one of the most critical function is the ability to move it across the U.S. border and into the United States for distribution. Because you can make all the drugs in the world, but if you can't get it across the border in bulk and sell it, then what's the point? You can't make any money. 98% of all the narcotics coming into this country come in through what we call points of entry, POEs, right? Through the cross-border checkpoints. Narcotics hidden in cars, right? We call them traps, hidden compartments in cars, in cargo, in parcels, and in rail, right? I'll just give you an example. In San Ysidro, on an average day, 70,000 cars cross from Mexico into the United States, and that's not including cargo, container trucks, rail, or parcels. I think roughly 30,000 to 40,000 parcels come in every day, if it's not more. So we know drugs are in parcels as well, but the bulk of narcotics coming into this country, whether it be fentanyl, heroin, methamphetamine, are concealed in those cars. So again, San Ysidro, 70,000 cars come through. The cartels know CBP does not have the manpower and technology to search 70,000 cars, right? So less than 1% will be identified through various means of intelligence or random inspection. So they do what we call shotgunning. They're going to send in 100 cars loaded with drugs. They know one car gets hit, that car gets searched, the rest of the cars move through because you can't hold up trade. Now, I think last year trade between Mexico and the United States was some $950 billion. That's a huge number, right? Mm-hmm. My solution is, just like with 9/11, it changed the way we travel. Nobody gets on a plane unless they're inspected. Their luggage gets inspected, you get scanned, all kinds of technology is utilized, and TSA doesn't care if you're going to wait in that security line 2 hours. You better get to the airport 2-3 hours early, because that plane's not leaving unless everybody's checked. 100% inspection, because we can't have planes blowing up, right? We decided that. Can't have that happen. So if we're losing 100,000 people a year to fentanyl, just to fentanyl, 30,000 to cocaine, another 20, 30,000 to methamphetamine and heroin. So we're looking at over 100,000 people dying because of dangerous narcotics, right? And that's probably a conservative estimate. So my solution is no vehicle comes into this country unless it's checked. Let's just a 100% inspection. So we increase the funding for CBP to build technically capable checkpoints, right? Better ramen, better x-ray, better canine. We put together very highly technical inspection teams. And for San Ysidro, if CBP says we can only search 15, 20, 30,000 cars in cargo 100%, well, then that's all that comes in the country, right? We're going to have 100% inspection. Nothing's coming in unless we're looking at it through some, I think maybe 35 to 40 different points of entry from California all the way down through Texas, right? But the pushback's going to be, well, now you're messing with trade, right? You're messing with that $900 billion number. So the question really comes down to what is the value of an American life versus the value of U.S. trade? Because there is a solution, but that solution is going to cost us. It's going to tip the scale. There's no free lunch here. There's no solution that's not going to have some kind of blowback. That's not going to have us, hey, this is going to affect another area, right? If we look at the war with Iran, oil prices shot up. People are complaining now the gas prices have gone up. It's just temporary. It's not going to last another 20 years. Iran can't hold out for maybe another couple of months if possible. Oil will pick up and then the prices will come back down again. But people need to understand that a correction to the market is going to take time to level out. So we correct and we restrict the number of vehicles coming into the country because we do better inspections and we start seizing. The cartels say, well, if we can't move it in vehicles, how do we move 100 metric tons of fentanyl into the United States? Because you can't fly it in on clandestine airplanes. You can't backpack it in because cross-border immigration is down to like less than 1%. President Trump pretty much ended that. And the go fast, now you can't smuggle it via the Caribbean. So if you can't fly it in, if you can't backpack it in, if you can't bring it in through go fast and water, and now your vehicle transportation and commercial transportation is being choke pointed, how are you going to move all those narcotics? You can't. It just stacks up in Mexico. Now the domestic side, prices for everything go up because supply chain has been affected. So prices go up, it becomes more expensive. Perhaps the U.S. put more money into rehabilitation, rehab, treating addiction, and slow the addiction process. Because right now, more people are being addicted than can ever be treated. You're not going to be able to keep up with the rates of addiction with addiction treatment because it's a very complicated process, right? So as more drugs are coming in, more people are becoming addicted. Addiction treatment becomes more difficult, more expensive, and we fail on that. And then we see the homeless population and everything else explode like we're seeing it now every day.
Yeah.
So, there you go.
Wow. It's so it does make a lot of sense, right? You stop it from coming in and then what do you do? But yeah, it's weighing the scales, as you put it, of like, how do we not affect domestic trade or international trade rather, and put that on a scale. But it is just a matter of making the choice to do it, right? How prevalent are these technologies now in the field? Like if you think about like where you rolled out Raman spectroscopy, is this a thing that's like all over the world of drug interdiction now?
Oh, the drug identification technology now is phenomenal. I've been to dozens of trade shows in the last 5 years. You have a tomography X-ray, which has the ability, let's say there was a case, I think it was in Australia, Sinaloa cartel sent, hundreds of kilos of fentanyl concealed in, multiple tons of steel wrapped into the core, right? I don't even know where they put that together. You got to think about in Mexico, they have these factories where they're just concealing drugs in all types of cargo. That's a whole nother topic. X-ray wouldn't catch that. So it was run through what they call tomography X-ray, which is like ground penetrating X-ray. And the X-ray was able to see through that steel and see that there was something inside it. So the Australians opened it up and it was a bunch of fentanyl. So you have incredible X-ray technology that can do containers, cars. You have canines. Once you find it, then you have to figure out what it is. And that's where Raman spectroscopy comes in, right? Raman is going to say, hey, this is and it's bulk. So you're going to be able to say it's coke, heroin, fentanyl, methamphetamine, right? We're not looking at hundreds of different types of precursors. So the bulk identification is rather easy. The question is, the difficulty is finding it. And CBP, we have the technology to find it, but we don't have the personnel and the manpower, and the POEs, the points of entries, aren't reconstructed as, let's say, a TSA checkpoint. When you go in, you have the new X-ray scanners. You have the ones where you put your arms up and it looks if you have any body, if you're carrying narcotics. Very sophisticated technology to cut down on drug trafficking. I don't even think people are carrying narcotics on planes anymore because it's just too difficult, right? Scanning technology. So we've shown that we can make airports safe. So certainly we can make these points of entry narcotic smuggling proof. We have the technology, but do we have the money and the willpower to say we're not going to lose another 300,000 people to a border that we can't control what's coming into our country?
So let's go back to your career here. So you eventually are working on kind of global policy with the DEA, right? And how these global strategies are happening. Is that kind of how you round out the end of your career with the DEA?
That was pretty much, at 57, it's mandatory retirement. So I was just at 57, and I was at this, task force, this international or U.S. task force on fentanyl mitigation. So that's how I finished out my last 2 years. And then Rigaku, he called me up and said, "Hey, we understand you had a really successful program in Myanmar using our technology. We've never had a program like that. We'd like you to come be the director of counter-drug technology and work as a strategist, as a consultant, as a subject matter expert on how to integrate Raman technology into existing law enforcement strategies." So that's basically what I did for the last 4 to 5 years of my career. So that was a really good fit and transition for me. So I think I retired was it May 31st and started June 1st for Rigaku in like 2020, 2021.
Okay. And so with your current role, talk to me about what that is. You're really translating the needs of law enforcement and drug interdiction agencies to, a company like Rigaku to like have them fill the need that these law enforcement agencies have.
Well, exactly. I'll meet with various law enforcement personnel along with Rigaku sales personnel, and we'll talk about, like I'll do exactly what I did in Myanmar. Okay, what's your particular problem in this? Are you having a bulk problem? Are you having a trace detection problem? How can you use Raman in undercover operations? How can you use Raman to identify precursor chemicals in labs? What's your strategy for managing fentanyl as a weapon of mass destruction? It's now really, and you got your hazmat 1 hat on. You understand hazmat. Now fentanyl is in a classification as a hazardous material, right? So how do police departments now manage that? If you're a patrolman, you pop a trunk on a car and there's 6 kilograms of an unknown substance in there, what's your policy? How are you going to manage that? You're going to open it up and do a test? Well, it could be fentanyl, you kill yourself, right? Do you have any Raman technology? Are you using canines? Or are you just going to I'm not going to touch it. I'm going to call the hazmat guys to come take care of it. So I'll work with law enforcement, with prosecutors, with Rigaku sales personnel, both domestically and internationally, on what's the strategy, right, to using this technology. It's not just knock on a door, hey, I've got a Ramen, you should buy it, right? That's not my role. My role is to help develop strategies that integrate this technology into existing law enforcement strategies, right? And of course, also I do, like we're doing this podcast, getting information out. What is the narcotic situation, right? I don't think there's a lot of information out there where people have like the discussion you and I are having. I really appreciate you having me on the show to really talk about some of these issues, because the American public, they get, you watch CNN or Fox or whatever, you just get a little bit. You don't get the full picture, right? And the narcotics problem it's been a long-standing problem in the United States. And I think people really don't understand, how deeply embedded it is in our culture and what it's going to take to extricate us from this situation.
Okay. So as I let you go here pretty shortly, I have one more thing. I like to have people look back, especially people that have a long kind of career like yours, and look back in retrospect. What are the things that you are most proud of in your career, and what things do you miss the most about the work that you were doing?
Oh, without question, it was going through the Ranger School Academy. I mean, that was the high. I mean, you can see behind me, I've got my Ranger certification on the wall. That was the highlight of my career. I mean, I just had no idea I would gravitate and enjoy working in that paramilitary role in Central and South America. Then, of course, my transition to the diplomatic circle, working in the U.S. Embassy in Pakistan, where I worked at the strategic level, working with foreign countries on drug policy, counter-drug investigations, counter-terrorism investigations, right? So my career really progressed from street agent to field paramilitary operations to diplomatic corps operations. So I really, at this point in my life at 61, I have a very complex view of narcotics trafficking, a complete 360 view, you could say. So I get it from top to bottom, right? So I would say that's really the Ranger School, and then of course working overseas. If I could get a job working in an embassy back overseas as narcotics liaison officer, I'd probably take it immediately. There's no better experience than for me working in the overseas environment, the complexities of working at the highest levels of policy development, which of course serve U.S. interests to some degree.
Well, Michael, thank you for joining me today. I mean, the stories are incredible. I could listen to you talk all day long. And thank you for the work that you did, right? You dedicated your life to assuring the safety of, United States citizens. And I appreciate that.
No, thank you for the opportunity. And thank you for your work too, that you're doing it with the fire department there and in the hazmat situation and having this podcast, getting this information out to the American public, which I think is very important.
Awesome. Thank you again.
Thank you.